Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's really nice to be gathered together with so much of the Ethereum community in one place in real life. It feels a lot better than tweeting at each other on crypto Twitter where things can go wrong. The first time that I met up with the Ethereum community in person was in 2015. It was at DappCon 1 in London. In London, I stayed in a place called Wombat's Hostel, and I was in a room with 6 other dudes who are also part of the Ethereum community. It was real cozy, it was real snug, but for people who've been in the community since then, it's pretty unlikely that they still have to stay in a hostel. And that's really been so much of what the narrative of what this community has been about to the public. When you talk to people who are just normal people, when they hear about Ethereum, when they hear about Bitcoin, what they think of is people who got rich quick. People who happen to hold the right token at the right time, and suddenly their financial lives were changed. That's what people think we're all about. And today I'd like to start to change that narrative. I'd like it to be not a narrative about private wealth, but a narrative about common wealth. For me, it's not about the kind of wealth that you feel when you walk into the grand entryway of a millionaire's mansion. For me, it's about the kind of wealth that I feel when I walk through the Brandenburg Gate. It's the kind of wealth that generations of Germans cooperated to build and maintain so the people that came after them could continue to enjoy it. It's the kind of wealth that endures over time. The kind of wealth that I'm after isn't the kind of wealth that you feel when you can afford to pay for a private performance from Beyonce or Bruno Mars. There's only enough Beyonce to go around. If you want to have that experience, you're going to have to outbid everybody else who wants it. But what I'm after is the kind of wealth that I felt when I saw street performers along the beaches of Busan. Not only were they incredibly talented, but they had this unlimited hospitality that really made you feel at home even when you were on the other side of the planet. I'm not after a kind of wealth that's scarce. I'm after a kind of wealth that's limitless. What I'm after isn't the kind of wealth that you feel when you're high up in a high-rise and you're swimming in a pool that seems to just flow over the edge of the building and you can look down on the people below you. What I'm after is the kind of wealth that I feel when I swim in Barton Springs Pool back at home in Texas. You don't look down on anybody there. What you do is you look around at the people on the hillsides that are enjoying the same epic scene that you are. That same slice of nature that's open to everybody. I believe that our public life should be filled with glittering prizes for all people to enjoy. And when this community got started, that's really what it felt like, the trajectory that we were on. It felt like that because back in 2015, it wasn't about what paychecks you could get to do this kind of work. There weren't that many paychecks to be had. Instead, there was a different justification for working on infrastructure in this ecosystem. And that justification was Ether itself. There were people who held Ether, and instead of looking for a paycheck, they got to work on things that could make Ethereum better. Instead of looking for a direct reward, they expected an indirect reward. They expected that they could increase the utility of Ethereum itself, and that would increase the demand of the Ether that they held. So people got to work. That's how this community really got started. But the incentives that got us so far don't seem to be holding up. Now when people learn about blockchain technology, they don't always join our community. Some of them see other blockchains that may have just got started, and they see that maybe they can get in early on something new. There's other people who take their talents and their ideas and start their own networks entirely. They believe that they can take the token that they create and use that to fund their work. They can use that to reward themselves for the work that they're going to do. We're seeing our community start to splinter. We're seeing it start to divide because the incentives that got us so far aren't the right ones that are going to take us where we're going. We're seeing that same sort of decline in cooperation in so many parts of our society. We're seeing an economy that's beginning to stagnate. We're seeing a decline in civic society. And the reason that we're seeing that is not a new problem. It's an old problem. It's the same problem that was observed by Henry George over a century ago. It's the problem that he observed was that he saw an economy that was increasing in wealth, but at the same time he saw poverty increase as well. And if you want to see a modern example of what Henry George saw, you can just look to San Francisco. San Francisco is one of the wealthiest cities on this planet, but it has an incredible homeless problem. On one single block in San Francisco, you can see progress and poverty at the same time. The cause of that problem, and the cause of the problem that we're seeing in our community, is that we systematically reward the people who make prosperity scarce. We systematically reward the people who bottle up wealth, who try to exclude people. And the people that try to make prosperity abundant, they have a hard time getting rewarded at all. That's the problem that we need to solve to continue to move forward together. And I think we can solve that problem by changing our culture. If you've been around different cryptocurrency communities, you've probably noticed that each single one has a well-defined community with a well-defined culture. If you look at the Bitcoin community, it's a community that really got started in the aftermath of the financial crisis. There were people who saw banks get bailed out. They saw profits privatized and losses socialized. It seemed like a corrupt system. The people in the Bitcoin community turned to a system that was incorruptible, one that you couldn't influence with politics, one that wrote the rules of its system in code, that there would be 21 million Bitcoins, that they would be distributed along a curve, and that no one would be able to change that over time. And so many of us came up through that community and through that culture, and we learned so much from what it has to offer. In the Ethereum community, the culture that Ether creates is a culture of builders. The whole point of Ethereum is to build something on top. Sure, there's a token that you can hold, but the thing that draws people in is the idea that you can build something new, that the technology provides new opportunities that weren't there before. So the people that it attracts get to work. They find other people out there with interesting ideas or useful skills. And they build teams that can actually accomplish those together. That's really what's made this community so great to me. With Panvala, and with the Pan token that runs it, I believe we can create a new kind of culture. I believe that we can create a culture of generosity. I believe that we can create a culture where people give so freely and so joyfully because they see the abundance that their system is producing for our community. I've seen this culture of generosity play out in real life. I saw it at the Consensus retreat in February of last year. Consensus, the company that I work for, held a retreat in Portugal. And at that retreat, we played a game that works a lot like Panvala does. We didn't have a token that runs on a blockchain. Instead, we used poker chips. And we didn't have smart contracts to enforce the rules. Instead, we had a game master. But the dynamics of that game were the same as the dynamics of Panvala. What we did is we issued tokens to reward people at that retreat that were making our lives better. And to support those people, we bought tokens from them. And we donated it back to the system to complete the cycle that would make the system work. And the culture of generosity that really emerged around that game was a sight to behold. It was something new. It was something that was familiar yet unfamiliar at the same time. For me, the closest comparison is to the feeling you get when it's your first day as a first-year student on a college campus. There's so many new strangers that you're going to meet. And the only reason for them to cooperate with you is this idea that they're part of the same thing. They're in the same school as you. So that's the reason that we're going to move forward together. They're going to study with you. They're going to pursue friendships with you. They're even going to root for the same football team. It's that kind of school spirit that reminds me of the Panvala spirit that we felt as we played that game. This idea that we had a new reason to cooperate, that we could move forward together in new ways where opportunity was endless for us. I believe that the cultures that form around these different tokens are really tied to the community's beliefs about property. When it comes to Bitcoin and when it comes to Ether, the belief about property is really similar to the beliefs of Murray Rothbard. And what he believed is that when it comes to property, It's really just the business of the owner of that property and his heirs. The more labor that you put into it, the more value that you're going to get out of it. But the rest of society, you have no obligation to them. Your property is your business. But that's not the only view of property that's out there. Here in Germany, they believe something different. If you look at the basic law of Germany, Germany's constitution, it has something to say about property. And what it says is that property entails obligation. Its use must also serve the public good. When you hold a Bitcoin, there's no obligation. You can buy some Bitcoins, you can forget about it for 4 or 5 years, you can come back, find yourself wealthier than you were before, you didn't have to do anything to earn it. When you hold Panvala's tokens, that property entails obligations. Your obligation is to serve the public good. Your obligation is to govern our system of grants and issue grants that continue to produce abundance for our community. And if you do it well, that's what creates the reason to hold Pan in the first place. The reason to hold it is because donors will buy that token from the grant recipients. They'll donate it back to the system, and they'll complete the cycle that can continue to produce abundance for our community. Pan holders have this obligation to systematically reward the people who produce abundance. Now, when I describe the system to people, so a lot of times it sounds like a perpetual motion. This idea that you could issue grants in your own currency, that you could take them in your own currency. What's actually making that cycle continue? To really understand how it works, we can take a lesson from the River Spree. The Spree flows right outside this building. It's flowed before Berlin was here. It'll keep flowing long after we're gone. What makes it flow isn't a perpetual motion machine. What makes it flow is nature's cycle. The water starts near the Czech border in the highlands, and it flows downhill. When it gets to Berlin, it merges in with another river and heads out to the North Sea. And when that water sits in the North Sea, sunlight hits it, starts to evaporate, and forms clouds. And those clouds take that water back where it started in the highlands. That cycle is not a perpetual motion machine. Sunlight makes it go. Sunlight isn't what makes Panvala's system go. The sun cannot make donations to Panvala. I wish it could. My life would be a lot easier. But since the sun can't do it, you have to be the light. You have to be the light that collects the pan that flows to our grant recipients. You have to be the light that takes the pan back to its source. You have to be the light that completes the cycle that produces abundance for our community. Now, to some people that might sound like an obligation, but when you start to do it, I don't think it'll feel that way. I don't think you'll feel that way because when you contribute to the system, it's going to produce more value than you're putting in. It's going to produce more value than you're putting in because that value isn't private wealth. That value is commonwealth. When you don't have to reward each person individually, when you can reward them together, you can produce so much more that makes participating worthwhile. I'm not excited about Panvala because of some token or some smart contracts that we wrote. The reason that I'm excited about Panvala is because I've seen the light you shine in this community every single day that I've been a part of it. And the idea that we can start to harness that light and put it to work to produce the things that we all depend on, that's what gets me excited. As I speak, my teammate Isaac is sending the final transactions to initialize Panvala on the Ethereum network. For me, today is a particularly good day to start something new. It was on this day 38 years ago that my parents and my 2 older brothers arrived in America. They left everything they knew in Nigeria and started a new life in Texas. That choice that they made, that leap of faith that they took, has produced so much value for me, so much value for my family. And I think what lies ahead of us for Panvala is that same kind of opportunity. It's a leap of faith that you can take, but not with your feet. You don't have to move to be a part of Panvala. With Panvala, what matters is where you plant your heart and where you plant your mind. And what I'm asking you to do today is to plant them firmly with Panvala. Plant them firmly with this community. What I'm asking you to do today is to be the light that completes the cycle that produces abundance for our community. Panvala is now live, and I'm so excited to see what we do.
Okay, in that happy respect, we'll just take a moment to turn over the pulpit for our next speaker.
Could you say a little bit more about since the system is live, maybe some of the particulars of how the system works
There's lots of details about how the system works. I can explain it really briefly, but the basics of it are that we issue grants to teams in our community that are doing work. We issue those grants in our own token. And when you decide to become a donor to Panvala, the way that you do it is you take your Ether and you exchange it with the team that earned grants. They now have Ether to fund their work, and you have a Panvala token. You take that Panvala token and you donate it back to the smart contracts that store the token supply of Panvala. That's what keeps the tokens that we are issuing sustainable over time. We don't run out because you complete the cycle that keeps it going.